everybody. This is episode 6 of the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle, and I'm here with Greg. And today we're going to talk about, is the NFL soft, which you already know it is. But I guess the bigger question is, why is it soft, and is it hurting the game? Greg, you've played semi-pro football, and we've talked about this a bunch of times. So I'm going to come at it more from a science and from a standpoint from that angle. But are there other ways that the NFL could be perceived soft that's not related to actual play of the game?
Well, I think that, and I want to make sure, as far as from my perspective, I'm not saying the players are soft. I mean, you got to be really tough to play football at any level. I think the rules are starting to make the game soft. The players definitely are not. In the Super Bowl last night, Debo Samuel went off the field with an apparent hamstring injury. I thought he was done for the game. He came back in. George Kittle, I think they feared he had some sort of shoulder injury. I don't know if it was separated or not. He got braced up, and he was back on the sideline. These guys are definitely tough, some of the toughest athletes you'll ever find. But unfortunately, the league has made the rules to the point where it's making the game itself softer. And I understand that from the league's perspective, it's all for the sake of safety. But to me, these rules can actually make the game in certain instances
Thank you.
more unsafe. So as far as how you can tackle guys, especially quarterbacks, the strike zone for a quarterback in the pocket is very small. You can't hit him high, they'll throw a flag. You can't hit him low, they'll throw a flag. You can basically hit the quarterback like between the chest and the waist. If you're a defensive player and you're rushing the quarterback and you're coming at him 90 miles an hour, it's hard to adjust in midair and say, oh, well, I'm coming in too high or I'm coming in too low.
Especially when
I got to hit him right here. That's very hard. Yeah, that is very hard to do. Now, if you hit the quarterback in the head with any type of contact, it's a 15-yard penalty. You may be the tackle or guard or center may just push you by the quarterback and your hand might just brush the top of his helmet. Flag. I've seen it. It's a flag. In that instance, if you insist on doing that, why can't you go back to the way the face mask penalties used to be? Okay, if you just brush his helmet, it's 5 yards. If you head slap him, it's 15 yards. I get it. But to make them all 15 yards is ridiculous. And also, it's gotten to a point where any hard hit on the quarterback, the first thing the quarterback does is they sit up and raise their hands skyward. Where's the flag? And the defensive player, what does he do? He sheepishly looks around and goes, is there a flag? It's gotten to a point now, and I'll go back to my earlier point as far as not knowing exactly where to hit guys. You could twist yourself up in a pretzel and hurt yourself. In my opinion, the game is a bang-bang type game. And if you go in half speed or whatever it is to avoid a penalty, I mean, you might get hurt, especially if the other guy is coming full steam in 90 miles an hour. I have seen a situation where, and it was a few years ago, I think this was right after the league made a point to say, hey, you can't hit these quarterbacks in any kind of way anymore. There was a defensive lineman that came in, and he was about to sack the quarterback, but you could tell he was very mindful of not hitting him too hard, too high, too low. So he hit him kind of soft. The quarterback wriggled out of his grasp and got away and made a play, all because that player was so hesitant to hit the quarterback. And to me, that's an unfair advantage to the quarterback, quite frankly. The NFL has already slanted the rules in favor of offenses. See, NFL games, and this is my opinion, the NFL wants people to look at these games as entertainment, not physical athletic contests, not violent collision sport based on imposing your will on the other team to gain an advantage on the field from a territorial perspective. They want it to be entertainment. They want these teams to march up and down the field and score 40 and 50 points because they feel like that's what the casual fan wants to see. So going back to the way the rules are now, let's talk about receivers. After they're 5 yards down the field, you can't breathe on them. But yet the receivers can push off and grab all they want. How often do you see an offensive pass interference?
Oh, never.
Called? Not much. And see, these receivers, to their credit, they've learned how to use the rules to their advantage. If you see a ball thrown like up for grabs towards the end zone down the field, at the last minute, that receiver pushes off to get just enough separation to grab that ball. That is never called offensive pass interference. The defensive guys are at a great disadvantage. You certainly can't hit guys coming across the middle. You can't separate receivers from the football. You can't make blindside blocks. If when the ball changes possession on a turnover, you can't just go hit a quarterback. He's got to be somewhere near the ball. And I'm not knocking that rule. I know they want to protect quarterbacks. But back when I played, the quarterback was fair game. When the ball changed possession on a turnover, you could go find him and hit him. He's a football player. Our coach has always told us your head needs to be on a swivel. And I remember one time, I was a fat O lineman by then, but there was a play, I was like 10 yards away from where the ball was. And I'll admit, I was kind of, not paying attention. And just out of nowhere, some guy from the other team just decleats me. I mean, out of nowhere. And I'm like, to me, that's on me. I should be paying attention. It doesn't matter whether you're near the ball or not, but you can't do that anymore. To me, the rules that the NFL have come up with for the sake of safety, I can argue that even further, that those rules, or at least some of them, are actually increasing the risk of injury. So let me give you an example. So the NFL claims they want to make the game safer, especially with concussions and CTE. I get all of that. The NFL now plays 17 regular season games. There are now Thursday night games throughout the regular season, which means less practice time and recovery time for the teams that just played the Sunday before. The league has mandated less practice time in pads, which leads to less time working on tackling properly. Teams are permitted a total of 14 padded practices for the year.
Wow.
With 11 of those practices, year. With 11 of those practices conducted during the first 11 weeks of the season, a maximum of one a week.
Come on, man. The league.
So, okay. Yeah, over the years, tackling has gotten worse and worse. Why? Because the teams don't have enough time to work on tackling. You can't tackle in
Not
t-shirt
effectively.
shorts. So no. So how, if the league is saying these guys just need to learn how to tackle properly, well, how are they doing that when they have so few practices in pads to learn that? So you got guys out here that probably weren't great tacklers to begin with. Now they're out here tackling very improperly, with their heads down or leading with their shoulder and not wrapping up, that sort of thing, because they don't have the time they need to work on it. So from that perspective, okay, NFL, if you're so concerned about safety, why did you implement those rules?
They're just trying to, insurance companies.
It boils down to money at the end of the day, in my opinion. The game that I'm watching now is so unlike the game I watched when I was a kid. And I know, things change, things evolve. I get it. But I've heard players and teams alike complain, and also something that I just now thought of, they're making these teams fly to Europe and play.
Yeah.
And, all the travel time and all the time that you're likely losing that you could be spending practicing and recovering, now you've got to fly over, to England or wherever else and play a game. These guys don't necessarily want to do that, but the league is trying to expand the game globally. So that seems to take precedence over true player safety. But, to me, the rules that the NFL have mandated has caused the game to be softer, from a quality of play perspective on down. I remember, I think it might have been back in 2012. Now, the Pro Bowl, which I've talked to you about this before, it's absolutely unwatchable. I mean, it's glorified two-hand touch. I mean, the guys are not even half speed, and you can't play football at half speed. You just can't. It's just a very frustrating, ugly thing to watch as far as I'm concerned. So back until fairly recently, the Pro Bowl was played at I think Aloha Stadium in Hawaii. So Hawaii is this tranquil, peaceful paradise of a vacation spot where you're chilling out and having a good time. Those fans were booing. That's how bad the game was. Booing. And it had gotten so bad where it just looked like a bunch of friends playing two-hand touch in the park that ultimately the league got rid of the game. And unfortunately, the games that count are slowly starting to look like what the Pro Bowl looked like before they got rid of it. Now it's literally flag football. The last one they just had, that's what they did. They played flag football. And unfortunately, the game is looking more and more like that. And I think also with the rules being what they are, quarterbacks especially, and I think this will segue right into your point about what Tom Brady said about the rules. Now, when you and I were little kids watching football, quarterbacks call their own plays, man. They call their own plays, and they got knocked around like rag dolls out there. And, the wide receivers, they weren't really protected, and you really had to play the game smarter at that point to keep your guys from getting killed. And also, you had to know your stuff. You had to watch film. You had to know what the other team's tendencies were so you could exploit what the other teams do. But today, if you don't have to worry about your receivers, getting chucked downfield or getting hit across the middle or something like that, you play the game differently and probably less effectively from a fundamental perspective, that's part of the reason why the game looks so different than it did, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I will, give the floor to you as I finished up talking about what Tom Brady said about the rules of the game today and how it has impacted the game.
Well, I think for Tom Brady, for me, the key thing for him is the mentality of what he's coming at it with. It's the mentality that you have to protect yourself. Like you said, I just for the record, I played tackle football one season, and when I did, it's tough. Even at a low level Pop Warner, it's tough, and I didn't particularly enjoy the toughness, even though I love the game. So much respect to the players. But what Tom Brady was saying is that and to me, I interpret it as him saying that it's the mentality to, number one, protect yourself, and number two, protect your players by not throwing the ball over the middle when Sean Taylor is coming across it. And by the way, speaking of Sean Taylor, I got to say this, but the Pro Bowl, go check out the hit he did on the punter in a Pro Bowl. Sean Taylor took the guy out. You know what I'm talking about? That was incredible. So, and he had an old school mentality.
I'll have to look that up. I don't recall that, but it will be Sean Taylor,
the punter. He literally almost in the Pro Bowl thing.
He was.
So anyway, but nevertheless,
seriously.
But in getting into the CTE, we can get into all that. I guess we can talk about that. Maybe we shouldn't talk about it because we're not scientists or we don't medical people. And we have to make sure we talk about safety and all that. But the rules, to your point, Greg, and I love it, it actually makes it more difficult to protect the players. I think it was I'm this off memory. I'm going off script here. The quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think it was Palmer. Is that right? Cincinnati? Carson Palmer. Remember that nasty hit he took near the goal line in his own end zone at his kneecap, took him out for a season? I think at the time people were complaining about hits to the head, whatever. And so this dude goes low and takes him out. And like you said, then the rule became you can't hit quarterbacks low anymore. And so you're right, Greg. And then this whole thing that Tom Brady was talking about in terms of it's called the hip tackle rule, which I didn't know anything about this. But essentially, when you get to a defender, or I'm sorry, the offensive person gets tackled by a defender, they grab him by the hip and bring him down. And you say, how bad can that be? But you look at some of the footage, sometimes they're swinging them down, they're dropping them on their head, and they're bringing them from behind, and players are getting hurt that way. And so whether or not that is applicable for safety is not really the issue. It's like you said again, Greg, you broke this down brilliantly, is how do you train these guys to tackle properly? I know in college football, the whole thing about if you have an intentional hit or if it's they have to review the hit. If it's reviewed as a certain head, helmet, whatever hit, then you can be ejected. Targeting, thank you. Targeting, absolutely. And so you have to train these players on how to do it. I'm a Miami Hurricanes fan, and I remember one game we were playing when this rule had just come out, and you could tell these kids hadn't been trained to do it. And so it's a disservice to them. And now some of these players are getting hurt trying to tackle because they aren't trained to do it properly. And again, to your point, Greg, if you don't have enough time to practice, you really get like one practice a week or limited practice during a year. When do you have time to learn these new techniques as the new game is progressing in order to protect yourselves, the players, and to make sure your team doesn't get penalized unnecessarily?
Yeah, and going back to what you were talking about with the hip slide tackle, I guess it is. So I think what it is, from what I've seen, so imagine you are a 5'9", 180-pound cornerback trying to tackle a 6'6", 250-pound tight end. Okay. So what realistic options do you have to bring this guy down other than tripping him, which is illegal? Well,
yep.
You you grab them at the hips
and you fall down.
Hold on for dear life and slide down and grab them by the ankles. I mean, how else are you going to be? I mean, because you can't, um, hit this lower your pads.
You would die
and hit this guy straight up and expect him to go down. Yep. You have to find a way to bring him down. And that is an effective way to do that. Now, is there a risk of injury? Yeah, there's a risk of injury every play. You can get hurt. I think there was a player, I think a linebacker for the 49ers. I think he got hurt running on the field. I mean, you can
ACL, I believe.
Yeah. You can get hit. Yeah, you can get it. Unfortunate too. You can get hurt on any play. So I get it. You might injure the guy's ankles, but I think to a man, when the whole thing about, not hitting players in the head really came into focus after the concerns about concussions, these guys are like, I'd rather you hit me in the head, because if you hit me low, that's ACL, that's a sprained ankle, broken ankle. They'd rather you hit them in the head, because it's like, okay, if I have a concussion, if it's minor, I might be out a week or two. If I have a torn ACL, I'm likely out for the season. So they're like, no, hit me high, but they can't, because that's a personal foul, 15-yard penalty. So if you take that, I guess, hip slide tackle away from the defense, then how are they going to tackle guys bigger than them? I would like, I mean, seriously, I would like the guy at the league office demonstrate on YouTube, okay, if a small guy can't tackle a larger guy that way, how are they supposed to tackle? Jump on their back and yell for help until his other teammates come and help?
Yeah.
I mean, no. If you're the only defender between that big old tight end and the goal line, you've got to do something. And you've already taken so many other things away from the defense as far as what they're able to do to defend. You can't take that away too. I mean, come on. As football players, we know the risk when we go out there, but don't take all of the tools we have to be able to make plays away. They've done so much of that already. They've modified the kickoff rules to where you can't overload on one side for onside kicks. Now you hardly ever see effective onside kicks. And the kickoffs to where they all go deep in the end zone and they're not returned, that's another play or a way for the offense to score that they've basically taken away. So, I mean, they're tying these guys' hands as far as what they're able to do for the sake of safety, and yet the league are doing other things contrary to that end. It's frustrating to watch. I know the players are frustrated, but see, as players come along and as the years go by, and that's the only way players know, it'll be easier for the league to get them to do it that way. But right now, when guys were used to tackling one way, it's like, oh, well, I can't tackle that way. Now I have to adjust and tackle a different way. But to the referees' credit now, and I know that'll be another topic of discussion, when those rules were tightened up and modified, you saw flags all over the place to the point where it just ruined the flow of the game. I think the officials are adjusting accordingly to where last night, I don't recall seeing any roughing the passer calls, and you see at least 2 or 3 every game. I didn't see any personal foul calls except for one horse collar tackle that I saw. So it was a pretty clean game from that perspective, and the officials did not impose themselves on the game, and that was refreshing to see. But, the rules are making the game softer in my mind for the sake of safety, and there's nothing wrong with safety. to me, let's make football as safe as possible, but it's a collision sport. You're going to, you run the risk of getting hurt. Soccer, on the other hand, is a contact sport, but I've watched a lot of soccer in my day, and guys still get hurt. Guys still get concussions. It's a very physical game. If you're going to have a competitive athletic contest where you're competing with somebody head to head, man on man, there is a chance of somebody getting hurt. You cannot legislate that out of the game. Otherwise, it's going to be two-hand tag. And I don't want to see anybody get hurt, believe me. I've seen it firsthand, guys getting hurt. Don't want to see that. But by the same token, you cannot legislate all of the collisions and the violence out of the game. Otherwise, it's not football anymore.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I gotta bring something up. When you mentioned about the lower guy, smaller guy going up against, say, another player, well, I have two things to talk about because I love history. I'm gonna bring two historical things up here. As a Redskins fan, I gotta bring up my man Kenny Houston. He did one of those hip tackles against a Dallas Cowboys defender on a Monday night game to secure the victory. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, yeah, some people who are on this program listening to this who may not know that much about football in terms of all that, someone might say, well, who cares if he jumps on his back and calls for help as long as he gets him down? Well, football is measured by yards, inches. And so if you need to stop that momentum, and so if you jump on someone's back, they can still run for maybe another 5-6 yards, right? And so that it carry
him into the end zone.
Exactly.
I mean, let's be honest.
Houston, who is a Hall of Famer, safety for the Washington Redskins, did that exact same move. Yep. Go look it up. He grabbed the guy by the hip and pulled him down right before he got to the end zone, saving the ball game. Now, Greg, I'm not an Eagles fan, but I got to bring up this guy here, man. This is my all-time favorite dude in terms of defense. It's not Lawrence Taylor, whatever, but it's Chuck Bednarik of the Philadelphia Eagles. And you can't, I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see it on screen or not, but this is a hit. This is a hit.
I can't.
On Frank Gifford, who at the time was a running back. Dude's laid out and he's celebrating. Now, Chuck said, I was doing it because it was a fumble. I'm excited about the fumble being whatever, but that's just an amazing picture. But it goes beyond that. I'm gonna read this for you, Greg. I want your reaction to this because this is absolutely amazing. So this happened, this picture, you guys can see it who are watching the video podcast on YouTube. On November 1960, a game between the Eagles and the New York Giants at the original Yankee Stadium, Bednarik knocked Giants running back Frank Gifford out of the football. I'm not mean-spirited, guys, but it's just hilarious that he was out for 18 months. Knocked him out of football for 18 months in one of the most famed tackles in NFL history, often referred to simply as the hit. Bednarik's clothes. Sorry, Greg. This is crazy. If this happened today, he'd be arrested. Bednarik clotheslined tackle of Gifford, dropped Gifford immediately to the ground, and Gifford immediately went unconscious, went to the hospital on a stretcher, blah, 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 blah. But check this out. This is what's interesting. This is interesting. So when Gifford, years later, was asked about the hit, this is the guy. Gifford said, the hit was a, quote, clean shot, unquote. He said, Chuck hit me exactly the way I would have hit him, unquote. Greg, reaction.
So, for context, Frank Gifford was Kathy Lee Gifford's husband.
Yeah.
So that, just for a little bit of trivia there and context. So I feel like, back then, especially when you had hits like that, you had back when it was okay to make highlight reels of hard hits. I mean, ESPN used to have, I think, a segment called Jacked Up, where they'd sit around and look at plays from the previous week where, dudes just get the daylights knocked out of them. They can't do that anymore. but Chuck Bednarik,
Deacon Jones,
Dick Butkus,
yeah.
guys like that were just
Mhm.
feared.
Oh my
Ray
gosh, yes.
Nitschke absolutely feared,
Yeah, absolutely.
Jack Lambert, absolutely feared as far as the way they played the game, the way they hit you, the way they tackled. And at that point in time, the rules were different. At one point in time, the head slap was legal, and
Talk about
defense
that.
guys used that
What's the head slap?
to
Talk about
their
that.
advantage. Okay, so what a head slap is, so as a defensive player, especially a defensive lineman, defensive end, when they come off the ball, they would come out of their stance and they could just open hand slap the offensive lineman upside the head to gain an advantage to, maybe stun them for a second or two to get around them. Deacon Jones was the master of the head slap. And it was legal. The guys used it to their advantage. Now, you might think, well, they've got a helmet on. How bad can it be? Okay. So even today, you put a football helmet on and you let a 260, 270 pound grown man open hand slap you upside the head and see how that feels. It won't feel good, I guarantee you. But yeah, that used to be legal once upon a time. So back when Bednarik hit Gifford, if Frank Gifford says that was a legal clean hit, and just for a little bit more context, Frank Gifford was considered this clean-cut, all-American boy that, every player wanted to be like, or a lot of, kids wanted to be like and looked up to. So if he says it was a clean hit, then believe it, at that time, it was likely a clean hit. And that's just the way the game was played back then. Now, you certainly could not do that now. So I watched a couple of 30 for 30 episodes, and that is a fantastic
It is.
series that ESPN does. And I watched one on the Bullies of Baltimore when the Ravens won the Super Bowl, I think back in 2000, 2001, against the Giants. And that particular team, the way they got after people was amazing. And they talked about a game early in that season against the Cincinnati Bengals where I think they knocked their quarterback out of the game, and they were just hitting those guys so hard and imposing their will on them so much that running back Corey Dillon left the game and refused to go back in. Literally just took his helmet off. I'm done. I'm not going back out there and taking
watch that.
any more of this punishment. And that's the way it was back then. As an offensive lineman, you may not be able to impose your will right away, but during the course of the game, if you're hitting a guy over and over and over and over again, at some point it's like, okay, am I willing to bring as much as I brought in the first quarter and continue to take these blows this guy is dishing out? Or am I gonna step to the side a little bit, or am I gonna slip on a banana peel and fall down so he won't hit me anymore? That's the way the game is played. You have to impose your will on your opponent. Another example is like, if you are a fullback and your job is to go through this particular gap and hit one of the inside linebackers, and you do that play after play after play after play after play, at some point, something's got to give. Either you're going to give in a little bit or he's going to give in a little bit. And that is your goal, to impose your will on your opponent. And another 30 for 30 I watched was on the 85 Bears. Same kind of thing. I mean, they beat people and opponents basically into submission.
They did.
It's
I remember
like,
them. Yep.
And to watch some of those hits, those guys would have had to just sign over their paychecks for the week,
Right?
because of all the fines. I mean, they were knocking quarterbacks out of the game. They were, basically they're like, your quarterback's got less than 3 seconds to throw the ball.
Yeah.
And, there was one game in particular that stood out. I think it was the NFC Championship.
Against the Redskins, right?
Um,
Against the Redskins, right?
And then they go in the Super Bowl. And they played the Los Angeles Rams. Now, Eric Dickerson ran for like 200 and something yards on the Cowboys that last week. I think he got
Hall
like
of Famer, by the way.
yards.
Hall of Famer, by the way.
The first, yeah. And he, at that time, he held the single season rushing record for the NFL. I think it was like 2,105 yards, I think. It's what he had in one season. Yeah, Hall of Famer. So, like, I think the first time he touched the ball, Mike Singletary shot through there, hit him, stood him straight up, and that set the tone for the rest of the game.
He was a big guy.
That's the way that they
small guy. Dickerson was not.
No, Eric Dickerson, I think, was like 6'3", 225 or something like that.
No, he was not.
Not a small man. Not a small man, but Mike Singletary's like, you're not getting 200 yards on us. You'll be lucky to get 20 on us. And he stood him straight up, and that set the tone for the rest of the game. And that's how it was. It wasn't about going out and hurting guys or anything else like that. But it's kind of like boxing. Boxing is a combat sport. Football is a collision sport. I get it. But in football, basically, you are going to continue to, if you're hitting a guy all day long, it's like, look, I'm going to try to make this guy quit. Either, I'm not going to try to make him, hurt him or anything else like that. But I want him on a mental and physical level. I want him to give up. I'm tired of this guy hitting me. I'm just going to, kind of move to the side or just fall down, just whatever. As an opposing player, that's what I want to do. Football is a game of wills. I'm going to impose my will on you. And I'm going to do that to help my team be the victor when that final horn sounds. So, people, and see, that's the thing. People that didn't watch the NFL back then, they may listen to that. It's like, well, wow, that's mean. Well, no, I mean, it's not mean. That's just the way the game is played. And everybody that played the game that way understood that. Understood it. It's like, when I'm out here on the field, I don't have any friends. I'm out here to do my job, and I'm out here to do whatever it takes to win the game. I'm going to physically impose myself on my opponent to the point where at the end of the game, we're going to be the winners. Boxing, same thing. The object is to win on points, which, that's fine and dandy. You still got to hit the guy, knock him out, or make him quit. It sounds brutal, and it is, but that is the sport, and that's the object of it. I want to beat the guy across from me, and I'm going to knock him around and push him around and make him basically discouraged and more or less give up.
It's technically like a war. A war doesn't have to be people killing each other. You can win a war by capturing someone's army. There's been many battles that have been won. Not a single person got hurt, and it's just they gave up. But what if they fight back? What do you do then? Do you use harsh language? No, you have to up the ante in terms of force, and that of course eventually becomes deadly. Now, football is not deadly anymore. It used to be when it first came out, when they allowed, they allowed you to lock arms together down the line and basically clothesline people, the flying fortress, whatever they call it. That's illegal. And people were dying in the 1900s, late 18th century, when football was out, because it was very violent and people were dying. So they did regulate that sort of thing. And I think Teddy Roosevelt himself actually wanted to ban the sport because it was so violent. So, but the point is, like you said, Greg, enforcing the will And when people enforce their will back, that's when you get the violence, right? And so, but that's also how you can win football games through that. And I think, in some ways, I think that's why the woke agenda is against football, because it does have that aspect in it. It's right there under the surface, and you really can't get around it. I mean, it's obviously warfare on the field. You have two lines fighting for yards, trying to gain territory, aerial attack, ground attack, the whole nine. It's just a paradigm for war, and it's very entertaining when done the right way. So, but yeah, so I'm gonna give you the last word on this, Greg. I think we've covered this pretty well. I think obviously, um, you know, it's a sport that is trying to be safer, but at the same time, they're implementing rules, I think, that can be argued is making it not as safe. Is basically being counterproductive. So anyway, Greg, I'll give you the last word.
Sure, thank you. So, again, for those that have been listening to this for the past few minutes, and you might be a little bit alarmed at what we're saying, I don't want to sound, unsympathetic or unfeeling, but, if that aspect of the nature of the game offends you or upsets you, I mean, don't watch. And I know that sounds flip, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but you know, sports aren't for everybody as far as participating or spectating. And regardless of how many rules the NFL enacts to try to keep the players safe, that try to make the game, less violent and that sort of thing, regardless of how much they do, they're going to always be people that say it's not enough. You need to do more. You need to do more. There's only so much you can do without adversely affecting the spirit and the nature of the game as it was intended to be played. I'm all for safety. I really am. Nobody wants to see these guys retire with, brain injuries and that sort of thing that really, um, adversely impacts their quality of life. But by the same token, if you talk to most of these guys and ask them, if you could do it all over again, would you? Most of them would say yes. But by the same token, if you ask those same guys, do you want your son to play football? Some of them might say no. In my case, when my son was a lot younger, he asked me, Dad, can I play football? And I'm like, uh-oh. Because I know how, seriously, I know how rough the game can be. I've got a trick ankle now that when the weather is right, it starts hurting. So, thank the Lord I was able to come away from playing the game without any major lingering injuries. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want my son to get hurt. So I'm like, well, son, why don't you wait until you get older and bigger, and then we'll talk about it later. Fortunately, once he got bigger and older, he was interested in other sports. And I'm like, phew. Now, if he had truly wanted to play football, I would have said, okay, son, I'm fine with you playing football. But again, I would certainly stress to him, play the game the right way, play the game correctly,
Right.
Tackle correctly, block correctly, that sort of thing. Be fundamentally sound so you can reduce the risk of you potentially getting hurt. But, I'm glad he didn't play football, because I know how rough and tough the sport is. And you can ask me sometime about what actually goes on in those piles. It's not.
Yeah, we should do a
It's not
show on
pretty.
that. We should do a show.
It's not pretty.
I've always wondered.
It's not pretty. Oh yeah, yeah, and and what kind of things do those guys say to each other? Yeah, that's not pretty. This is a family show, so I couldn't
Maybe do it wrong.
really talk about that much either.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, after hours. Yeah. So, but yeah, but again, to our audience, some of you that are younger and don't really know or understand how the game used to be played, please don't misunderstand me. I'm all for safety. I'm all for making the game as safe as possible. I don't ever want to see anybody get hurt. And I'm sure none of those guys on the field want to see that either. But at some point, you've got to maintain the integrity of the game. And the trend of these rules are jeopardizing that. And that's my opinion. And I feel like a lot of other people share that opinion. But, by and large, at the end of the day, if you're a fan of football, continue to be a fan of football. It's a different game than it was back in our day, but continue to enjoy the game, continue to enjoy watching the game, but understand that the game is changing. And for some of us, not necessarily for the better, but at the end of the day, you want everybody to be happy and healthy when that last whistle blows or when that last horn sounds. And I would want that for everybody. But, I love the game of football, and I want everybody that loves the game of football to continue to love football. And I'm hoping that the league can find some kind of happy medium between overdoing it as far as what they're doing for the sake of safety and maintaining the integrity of the game.
Well said, Greg. Well said. Well, with that, I 100% concur with what you said there. And everyone who's listening to this, thank you so much for tuning in to the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle. That was Greg. You can catch us here on YouTube if you're watching the video format of it, Apple, Google, and also on Spotify. And we're going to try to expand that to other platforms as well. So for episode 6, that is it. We'll catch you next week with episode 7. And with that, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thank you.